I'm going to make a workshop in Moodle 2 to see what I can learn about it, if you'd like to come along. I don't understand all of it yet, so please let me know if you see any mistakes. As usual, with the editing turned on, we go to add an activity, workshop, and then as it's Valentine's Day that I'm making this, I've set one up called All You Need Is Love. The introduction is basically where we explain what the workshop's about. I want them to write a poem on the subject All You Need Is Love. They can be given a sample poem that they can practice on before they send in their own work or evaluate their peers, or we can use this for the traditional peer assessment. There's even an option where they can evaluate their own poem. They get a grade for the work they send in, grade for submission, a grade for the work that they evaluate, grade for assessment. In terms of grading strategy, I'm going to keep it simple and use a cumulative grading and basically just give them simple criteria and a grade they can mark it out of. Instructions for submitting basically means what they have to do and send in. And instructions for assessing, which I'm going to put in now, tells them what they have to do to review their peers' work. There are a few other settings then. Access control, which is hidden by default, is where we can set the date for them sending in their work and for them to begin to assess the work of their classmates. And then, as in Moodle 1, common module settings is where we can decide if we want no groups, separate or visible groups. And then restrict availability is something which is brand new in Moodle 2, enabling us to decide the conditions upon which they're allowed to access the workshop. Save and display takes us to a fantastic table showing the different phases of the workshop. We're in the setup phase at the moment, which is green. We've done the introduction and the instructions, so they're ticked or checked. Edit assessment form takes us to the place where we can decide the marking criteria or rubric and the grading for our students. I'm keeping mine simple. I'm just going to get them to make a grade out of 20 on the words, how good and original the words are. And the second assessment element is the rhyme, the rhythm, the flow of this particular poem, and again out of 20. When we save and close it and we get back, we see that the setup phase, everything's ticked and it's complete. So it's time to go and turn on the light bulb of the submission phase, which will then allow our students to start sending in their work. And we can see that there's a note. There are some users who've not yet submitted. In fact, none of them have sent in their work yet. So now's a good time perhaps to go and have a look at what it might look like from the student's point of view. We logged in as a student in our class, George. When he goes to the workshop, he sees that same table of the workshop phases with the submission phase in green, instructing him to submit his work. Clicking Edit Submission is exactly the same as the online text assignment. That's where he'll type in his poem. Okay, everyone's sent in their poem, and in fact we, the teacher, we can see this. If we scroll down, we can see the names of the students in our class. There are only 4 of them, the Fab 4, and the poems and the time that they sent them in. So now is the time for us to click the Allocate Submissions link. This is where we can decide who gets to review whose poem. And we can do it in 2 ways. Manually, here, you see the students are in the middle. If we take George, for instance, on the left, we can decide who is going to review George's work. To the right of George, we can decide whose work George is going to review. But if that's too much effort, clicking Random Allocation will let Moodle do it for us. There are 4 students in this class, and I'm going to set it so that each student gets 3 other pieces of work or poems to review. If I click Save Changes now, Moodle is going to distribute all of those poems to each of the members of the class for me. If we disagree with the way Moodle has sorted out the reviewers and the reviewees, we can change it manually in the manual allocation screen. Okay, now is the time to turn on the light bulb of the assessment phase and let our students do their peer reviewing. It's now gone green and we're ready to go. Let's follow George, one of our students, and see what he gets to see now when he goes back to the workshop. The column is in green assessment phase, instructing him that he has 3 poems to review. If he clicks on the Assess button, it brings up that basic marking criteria with the grade scale that we set up at the very beginning, and we could have made this as complex or as simple as we need for our students to do. He selects the grade, he puts a comment if he wants to, and then he does that for each one of the poems he's been given to evaluate. Okay, all the poems have been reviewed. Now it's time to go to the grading evaluation phase and calculate the marks. We have 2 sets of marks. The submission grade, that's the grade the students receive from their peers, and the assessment grade, which is what they get for assessing each other's work. The assessment grade is based on how close a student is to the assessments given by the other students, and that's the one in brackets here. You see we have 2 new columns, grade for submission and assessment. But what if we don't agree with any of the grades? As a teacher, we have total control over the grades. For instance, if you look at Paul's assessment grade, his assessment grade of George's poem is significantly lower than those done by John and Richard. Perhaps Paul had an argument with George offline and has given him a lower mark because he fell out with him. This is reflected in his lower assessment grade, which isn't in line with the others. We can override Moodle's assessment grade and make it even lower to punish Paul, and we can increase George's final mark for his poem. To override the assessment grade, we need to click onto that number of Paul's, and that's going to take us to a place where we can make a comment to explain to Paul why we're doing this, and then we can override the assessment grade that Moodle calculated. In this instance, we're going to make it lower. When we get back to the screen, we see that the original assessment grade is now red and has been crossed out and replaced with the new grade that we've overridden, and that's green. We need to do the same now with George's poem. We want to increase his final grade, and so we're going to click onto the name of the submission, onto George's poem, which will take us into the place where we can increase the final grade. And we're going to override that mark of 50 and make it 70 instead. This is reflected on the main screen now, where the original grade of 50 is in red and crossed out, and the new grade 70 is in green. The workshop's over now, and we've moved to the closed phase, and the grades are going to get pushed into the grade book. In this version of the workshop, we actually have 2 grades, the submission grade and the assessment grade, and within the mark book, using aggregation, we can tweak them and alter them however we wish. One final thing, in this workshop the boys could see each other's work. If you want anonymity, then you need to use the Override Permissions tab when you edit the workshop, and then set it so that they are prevented from viewing the author names and the reviewer names. There's plenty more I have to learn, but for now, that's all, and thank you for watching.